There comes a moment in life when the noise becomes too loud, the expectations become too heavy, and you finally realize that you have been looking everywhere for something that was quietly waiting inside you. Peace. Not the kind of peace that arrives when everyone agrees with you. Not the kind that depends on someone calling, someone staying, someone understanding, someone choosing you. A deeper peace. The kind that remains when the room is empty. The kind that sits beside you when nobody knows what you are carrying. The kind that does not disappear simply because somebody decided to walk away. Because there is a great difference between being alone and being abandoned. Sometimes being alone is not a punishment. Sometimes it is an invitation to hear your own thoughts without the interference of everybody else's opinions. An invitation to discover what you actually want when you are no longer trying to become what somebody else needs. An invitation to sit with yourself long enough to recognize the person you have been neglecting while spending so much time trying to keep everyone else comfortable. You may have spent years believing that peace would come when you found the right person, when somebody finally understood you, when somebody finally stayed, when somebody finally gave you the reassurance you had been begging for without saying the words. But what happens when you stop waiting? What happens when you decide that your life cannot remain suspended while you wait for another human being to make you feel complete? You begin to return to yourself. And returning to yourself is not always beautiful at first. Sometimes you meet the loneliness you tried so hard to outrun. Sometimes silence reminds you of people you miss. Sometimes the empty chair across from you feels like an accusation. But if you remain there, if you refuse to immediately run back toward distraction, you may discover something extraordinary. You can survive your own silence. You can eat alone and still enjoy the meal. You can walk alone and still notice the sky. You can spend an evening without a message arriving and still sleep peacefully. You can make decisions without asking 10 people whether you are making the right one. You can build a life that does not collapse every time someone changes their mind about you. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you become less desperate for company and more intentional about connection. That is the difference. You are no longer asking, who will stay with me? You are beginning to ask, who deserves access to the peace I have built? There is power in that question, because the goal is not to stop loving people. The goal is not to become cold, distant, or unreachable. The goal is to stop abandoning yourself simply because someone else has abandoned you. You can love people deeply without making them responsible for your happiness. You can appreciate companionship without becoming dependent upon it. You can miss someone without believing your life has ended because they are gone. And you can stand alone without believing that you have been left behind. Perhaps the greatest relationship you will ever have is the one you build with the person who looks back at you from the mirror every morning. So today, let the silence come. Let the room be quiet. Let the phone remain untouched. Let the world continue moving without demanding that you chase after it. And in that stillness, begin asking yourself the questions you have been too busy to hear. What do I need? What do I believe? What makes me feel alive? What have I tolerated simply because I was afraid to be alone? And who might I become if I finally stopped treating solitude as something I need to escape? Because sometimes the life you are searching for does not begin when someone enters your world. Sometimes it begins when you finally learn how to remain whole when no one else is there. Peace becomes something different when you stop waiting for another person to give it to you. For a long time, you may believe that peace will arrive with the right relationship, the right friendship, the right conversation, or the right person who finally understands every hidden part of you. You may imagine that once somebody stays, listens, chooses you, and never leaves, the restless place inside, you will finally become quiet. But depending on another person for your peace gives them a power they were never meant to carry. People change. People leave. People misunderstand. People become distracted by their own battles. Even those who love you deeply cannot be present for every moment of your life. If your peace depends entirely upon their presence, then every absence becomes a storm. Becoming your own source of peace means learning how to stand beside yourself when life becomes uncertain. It means becoming the person you can return to when everything outside you feels unfamiliar. It means telling yourself, I may not know what happens next, but I will not abandon myself while I find out. This does not mean that you should stop needing people. Human beings are made for connection. We need laughter shared across a table, hands held during difficult moments, voices that remind us we are not carrying everything alone. Independence does not mean isolation. It means that companionship becomes something you appreciate rather than something you desperately require in order to feel whole. There is tremendous freedom in knowing that you can comfort yourself. You can take yourself somewhere beautiful. You can make yourself a good meal. You can rest without feeling guilty. You can cry without feeling ashamed. You can sit quietly and allow difficult emotions to pass through you without immediately searching for someone to rescue you from them. Slowly, you learn that every uncomfortable feeling does not require an outside solution. Your peace begins with the way you speak to yourself when nobody else is listening. If you constantly criticize yourself, compare yourself, and remind yourself of every mistake, then solitude becomes painful because you are trapped with a voice that never offers mercy. But when you learn to speak to yourself with patience, solitude becomes a place of restoration. You begin saying, I made a mistake, but I can learn. I lost someone, but I have not lost myself. I feel lonely today, but loneliness does not define my life. I do not have all the answers, but I can take the next step. These simple truths become an inner shelter. Eventually, you stop measuring your worth by who calls, who stays, who notices, or who chooses you. Your worth becomes something you recognize rather than something you negotiate. You realize that another person's departure may hurt, but it does not have the authority to erase your identity. And when you become your own source of peace, you no longer enter relationships asking someone to complete you. You enter them already whole, ready to share your life rather than surrender it. And that is where real freedom begins. For many people, being alone feels like standing in front of a door they are afraid to open. They imagine that behind it is loneliness, emptiness, rejection, or some painful truth they would rather avoid. So they keep the television playing, keep their phones within reach, keep conversations going long after they have nothing left to say, and keep themselves surrounded by noise because silence feels too revealing. But solitude has a strange honesty. When the noise disappears, you begin to hear the things you have been trying not to hear. At first, this can be uncomfortable. You may suddenly remember conversations you never finished, people you never properly released, dreams you abandoned, and parts of yourself you ignored while trying to make other people happy. You may discover that some of your sadness was not caused by being alone at all. It came from being disconnected from yourself while constantly seeking connection with everyone else. Solitude places you in front of your own reflection. It asks you to stop performing. There's nobody to impress and nobody to convince. You do not have to pretend that you are stronger than you feel. You do not have to laugh when something hurts. You do not have to say yes when your heart is saying no. Alone, you can finally tell yourself the truth. And truth, although sometimes painful, can also be liberating. You may discover that you have been holding on to certain people because you were afraid of what their absence would reveal. You may realize that you were not actually missing them as much as you were missing the feeling of being needed. You may recognize how often you accepted less than you deserved, simply because being alone seemed more frightening than being mistreated. Solitude teaches you another possibility. You can choose yourself without becoming selfish. You can walk away without becoming cruel. You can enjoy your own company without closing your heart to others. The more time you spend alone intentionally, the more familiar you become with your own inner world. You discover the music that moves you, the places that calm you, the activities that make time disappear, the dreams that still quietly live beneath your responsibilities. You begin making decisions based on what genuinely matters to you, rather than what will earn approval. There is also a particular strength that grows when you learn to enjoy your own company. You stop rushing into relationships simply because an empty space makes you uncomfortable. You stop answering every message because you are afraid someone might forget you. You stop confusing attention with love and proximity with genuine connection. You begin to understand that solitude can be a workshop where your character is rebuilt. In the quiet, you learn patience. You learn self-respect. You learn how to regulate your emotions instead of handing them to someone else. You learn that a peaceful evening alone can be more nourishing than a crowded room where you feel unseen. And eventually, the silence that once frightened you begins to feel like home. You realize that being alone does not mean that life has forgotten you. Sometimes it means life has finally given you enough quiet to remember yourself. And once you learn to recognize the person waiting for you within that quiet, solitude stops looking like an empty room and begins looking like a place where your freedom can grow. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from needing to be noticed. You begin checking your phone before you check your own feelings. You wonder who has replied, who has remembered you, who has viewed your message, who has invited you, and who has chosen someone else without realizing it. You begin placing your emotional well-being in the hands of people who may not even understand how much power you have given them. Their attention becomes your reassurance. Their silence becomes your insecurity. Their approval becomes your evidence that you matter. And eventually, you forget that your worth existed long before anybody noticed it. Letting go of the need for constant validation does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop using their reactions as a measurement of your value. Someone can misunderstand you, and you can remain secure in who you are. Someone can reject you, and you can still respect yourself. Someone can ignore you, and you can continue living your life without turning their silence into a story about your inadequacy. This is difficult because many of us learn to seek approval before we learn to trust ourselves. We learned that praise meant we were doing well, and criticism meant something was wrong with us. We became skilled at reading people's moods, adjusting our behavior, and becoming whatever version of ourselves seemed easiest for others to accept. We called it kindness. Sometimes it was fear. When you constantly depend on validation, you slowly become a stranger to yourself. You ask, do they like this? Before asking, do I like this? You wonder, will they approve? Before asking, is this right for me? You choose what creates acceptance instead of what creates peace. But peace requires a different question. What do I believe when nobody is applauding? What do I choose when nobody is watching? Who am I when there is no audience? Those questions can change your life. You begin to understand that not every decision needs an explanation. Not every boundary requires permission. Not every dream needs to be understood by everyone. Sometimes you must allow people to misunderstand you without rushing to defend yourself. Sometimes you must let them think whatever they want while you continue quietly building the life you know is right for you. There will always be people who do not recognize your value. There will always be people who prefer the version of you that was easier to control, easier to please, or easier to predict. If you make their approval your destination, you will spend your entire life walking in circles. But when you begin validating yourself, something changes inside you. Compliments become beautiful, but no longer necessary for survival. Attention becomes enjoyable, but no longer addictive. Rejection becomes painful, but no longer devastating. You can appreciate love without begging for it. You become capable of saying, I know who I am, even if you do not. That sentence carries enormous freedom, because the deepest peace does not come from being universally accepted. It comes from no longer needing universal acceptance to feel worthy. You begin to understand that your life is not a popularity contest, and your soul does not require a public vote before it is allowed to exist. When you stop chasing validation, you finally have enough emotional space to hear your own voice, and that voice, once freed from the endless need to be approved, can lead you toward a life that feels genuinely yours. There is a kind of strength that cannot be seen from the outside. It is not loud, and it does not need to announce itself. It is the strength of having an inner life so steady that the changing behavior of other people cannot completely destroy your peace. People will come and go. Some will stay for years and still change unexpectedly. Some will promise forever and eventually become strangers. Some will love you sincerely, but be unable to remain in your life. This is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it is simply the nature of being human. And if your entire sense of stability depends on people remaining exactly as you need them to remain, life will constantly feel like something you are trying to hold together with trembling hands. Building an inner life means creating a place within yourself where you can return when everything outside becomes uncertain. It means having thoughts, values, dreams, routines, interests, and principles that belong to you. It means knowing what matters to you, even when nobody is there to remind you. When your inner world becomes rich, you no longer need constant external stimulation to feel alive. You can spend an afternoon reading, walking, writing, thinking, creating, learning, or simply sitting quietly, and none of it has to be witnessed by another person to have meaning. You stop believing that an experience only matters when it is shared online or approved by someone else. You begin discovering the quiet satisfaction of doing something simply because it nourishes you. Your inner life also grows through the promises you make to yourself. If you tell yourself that you will wake up earlier, take better care of your responsibilities, spend less time around negativity, or finally pursue something you have been postponing, then keeping those promises teaches you trust. Every time you do what you said you would do, you send yourself a message. I can depend on me. That message matters. Because when you trust yourself, the departure of another person becomes painful without becoming catastrophic. You can grieve without losing your identity. You can miss someone without chasing them. You can acknowledge that a relationship ended without deciding that your entire future ended with it. An inner life does not make you emotionless. In fact, it allows you to feel more honestly because you are no longer terrified of every emotion. You can experience sadness without believing you must immediately escape it. You can experience loneliness without calling yourself unwanted. You can experience uncertainty without assuming that something terrible is coming. You begin to understand that emotions are visitors. They arrive, they speak, and eventually they leave. Your responsibility is not to prevent every storm. Your responsibility is to build a shelter strong enough to survive one. This is why solitude can become so valuable. It gives you opportunities to practice being with yourself before life forces you to do it. You learn how to calm yourself, encourage yourself, entertain yourself, challenge yourself, and forgive yourself. You discover that your identity is larger than your relationships. Then something beautiful happens. People can enter your life without becoming your entire life. You can love without clinging. You can connect without disappearing into another person. You can give without constantly keeping score. You can accept someone's presence with gratitude, while understanding that their absence will not erase the person you have worked so hard to become. A steady inner life becomes an anchor. The world may change around you. Relationships may shift, plans may fail, and unexpected doors may close. But you remain connected to something deeper than circumstances. You remain connected to yourself. And when you know how to return to that place within you, you discover that peace is no longer something the outside world has permission to take away. Being alone can feel painful when you have mistaken someone's absence for proof that you are unwanted, when a relationship ends, when a friend becomes distant, when someone stops calling, or when the people around you become busy with their own lives. The silence can feel like a verdict. You may begin asking yourself what you did wrong, why you were not enough, or why someone else was easier to choose. But another person's absence is not a measurement of your worth. Someone leaving your life may change your circumstances, but it does not define your value. There is a difference between being alone and being unloved. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible. You can sit at a crowded table and feel completely disconnected. You can receive hundreds of messages and still wish that one particular person would understand you. And you can spend an evening by yourself while feeling deeply connected to your own life. Loneliness is not always about the number of people around you. Sometimes it is about the relationship you have with yourself. When you begin developing that relationship, solitude starts to change. The empty room becomes less frightening. The quiet morning becomes an opportunity instead of a reminder. You begin filling your time with things that make your life meaningful, rather than desperately searching for someone to fill every empty space. You learn that your life does not become smaller simply because someone is no longer standing beside you. Perhaps you once believed that certain people were chapters you could never live without. Then life moved forward. You cried. You struggled. You remembered. And somehow you continued. You woke up the next morning. You went to work. You laughed again. You discovered new interests. You met new people. You found parts of yourself that had been buried beneath the relationship. That is evidence of something powerful. You are capable of continuing. The human heart is remarkably adaptable. It can carry grief and still make room for joy. It can remember someone and still create a future. It can miss what was while becoming grateful for what is. Being alone also gives you the opportunity to distinguish between genuine connection and emotional dependence. When you fear being alone, you may tolerate relationships that drain you simply because having someone feels safer than having no one. You may accept disrespect, inconsistency, manipulation, or neglect because the alternative appears to be loneliness. But loneliness is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Losing yourself is. There is nothing noble about remaining somewhere that continuously diminishes your spirit just because you are afraid of an empty space. Sometimes the empty space is exactly where your healing needs to begin. You may have to sit there for a while. You may have to cry. You may have to learn how to spend weekends differently, how to celebrate yourself without waiting for someone else to celebrate you, and how to make plans that do not depend on another person's availability. These things may feel strange at first, but unfamiliar does not mean impossible. Eventually, you discover that solitude can contain laughter, creativity, rest, discovery, and freedom. You begin taking yourself seriously. You become curious about your own thoughts. You start protecting your energy. You stop treating your life as a waiting room for somebody else's arrival. And then you understand something you could not understand before. Being alone does not mean you have been forgotten. Sometimes it means you finally have enough space to remember that you were never meant to disappear inside somebody else's life. And the moment you learn to stand comfortably in your own presence, you begin to realize that your life can be full even when the room is quiet.